Welcome back to The Cellar. At the time of the events that transpire in this story, Kennedy Little Dyke was only 16 years old. Kennedy lives in Burley, Idaho. Burley is a city in Cassia and Minidoka counties in southern Idaho. There she attended school at Declo High School. Declo High is the second largest high school operated within Cassia County. Kennedy was a good student and a strong soccer player. In fact, she was the captain of the Declo High soccer team. With so much life left ahead of her, little did she know that a night in May of 2021 would change the course of her existence forever. It was May 22nd, 2021. Kennedy and two of her friends were hanging out, and the group made the decision to go on a short 4-mile drive to what they call the Declo D. The Declo D is a mountain range in Declo, Idaho that has the letter D marked into it. This particular area was known as a good spot to watch the sunset, and Kennedy and her friends were heading there to do just that. After making the drive there, the group of friends talked, and in particular, Kennedy vented her frustrations to her friends about the recent breakup of her and her boyfriend. Kennedy and her boyfriend had just recently broken up, and she was feeling extremely emotional about the entire thing. She was even quoted later on as saying that she was in a very dark and depressed state at this point in her life. She was feeling so low that thoughts of suicide were consistently on her mind. After watching the sunset, the group hopped back into Kennedy's vehicle and were in the process of making the short drive back to her house. They made it to the bottom of the mountain and were about 1 mile from their destination when the car veered ever slightly and Kennedy overcorrected. Upon overcorrecting, the car would slam straight into a telephone pole, and the car would begin flipping over and over. None of the passengers in the vehicle were wearing seatbelts at the time, and subsequently all 3 of them were launched from the vehicle at different points. Kennedy's 2 friends were both seriously injured in the accident, but Kennedy was the one who was now in a very unbelievable situation. The accident had launched Kennedy around 30 feet into the air. As she was launched, her body would connect with the electrical wires above, and her already badly broken and damaged leg would become entangled within the wire. Kennedy herself was in and out of consciousness during the entire ordeal, but when she realized the predicament she was in, she knew she didn't have much time. A man that lived nearby was the first to arrive on scene, and he immediately called 911 in order to get help there as quickly as possible. It is reported that for most of the ordeal, Kennedy was calm, cool, and collected, at times talking to people below her and consistently asking that somebody help get her down. Emergency workers would arrive on scene, and the situation before them was one they had never witnessed before. The electrical company had to be called to shut off power in order for rescue workers to even attempt to get Kennedy down. Luckily for Kennedy, a lot of miracles went her way on this particular night. Using some form of a ladder and bucket, the crews were able to finally reach Kennedy. Once they did, they were able to get a tourniquet on her leg, and they proceeded to get her down and into an ambulance. It is reported that there were numerous instances where they thought they may lose the young 16-year-old. She would be rushed to a nearby hospital where numerous surgeries would have to be performed. In an effort to save as much of her leg as possible, 4 amputations were done. The final amputation being where the femur break had occurred and where the tourniquet had been placed on her leg. It wasn't until this final amputation was done that Kennedy would start to show signs of recovery. After everything that transpired, it was an absolute miracle that all 3 passengers of the vehicle had survived. One of Kennedy's friends had a broken neck, back, and pelvis. Kennedy herself had her arm almost completely ripped off. The arm was hanging on by no more than the skin from her back. The arm itself has 5 main nerves that run through it, and Kennedy had 3 of them ripped completely from the spinal root, while the other 2 were stretched badly. Her collarbone and humerus were snapped, and as we already talked about, her femur in her leg was badly broken, which resulted in the subsequent amputation. Miraculously, the doctors were able to save her arm, and after doing a nerve transfer, they believe she may regain up to 50% of her control and mobility within that arm. Kennedy herself, though, has stated that she is 100% determined to get 100% of her mobility back. As terrible as all of this sounds, what makes Kennedy's story all the more uplifting is that she has been very clear that this accident may have saved her life. She was in a dark place prior to the accident, and after surviving it, she has found a new lease and purpose to her life. She still bears the guilt of what her friends went through, but at the end of the day, her accident wasn't an instance of speeding or drinking and driving. It was simply an accident by the very definition, and in the aftermath of it all, Kennedy has made it a point to share her story and her recovery. She has received an outpouring of support on social media as she continues to work hard and relearn how to walk with her prosthetic leg. At the end of the day, Kennedy continues to push forward while inspiring others through her pure determination and grit, carrying with her a whole new appreciation for the beauty in every sunrise that she almost didn't get to live to see. It was July 13, 1978, at the Institute for High Energy Physics in Protvino, near Superkov, Russia. A scientist by the name of Anatoly Bagarsky was busy working when a problem developed within the Institute's particle accelerator. In order to determine what the problem was, Anatoly decided he would have to stick his head into the channel where the proton beam runs throughout. Unbeknownst to Anatoly at the time, a prior experiment had been performed and the proton beam was still running. During that experiment, the warning lights were shut off and never turned back on, and this information was never passed down to Anatoly. As Anatoly proceeded to place his head inside the channel, his head would cross in front of the invisible beam of proton. His head and brain were immediately zapped, but in that moment, Anatoly felt zero pain. He would later describe that he saw a flash of light that was brighter than 1,000 suns. After he removed his head, he immediately knew he was in for some dire consequences. But he decided not to tell anyone, and he subsequently completed his work for the day and awaited the symptoms he knew were soon to come. As he tried to sleep that night, his face would begin to swell, and the longer the night drew on, the more uncomfortable he was. After completing a mostly sleepless night, Anatoly decided it was time to go tell the doctors what had happened. He would be immediately rushed to a special radiation clinic that was located in Moscow, Russia. Now, to put everything in this story into perspective, a dose of radiation from about 400 to 1,000 rads is typically more than enough to kill a person. It is believed that the dose of radiation that Anatoly took in that brief moment was in the range of 200,000 to 300,000 rads. But this situation was very unique, as no human had ever been exposed to this much radiation in such a focused beam before. The proton beam itself had entered through the back of his head, straight through his brain, and exited straight out the front of his nose. It literally burned a hole straight through the middle of his brain, which resulted in the left side of his face being left paralyzed. Doctors at the radiation clinic watched and examined Anatoly day to day, waiting for and expecting the absolute worst. But miraculously, the swelling would start to subside, and Anatoly would recover from the incident. Ultimately, his face would remain paralyzed on the one side. He also lost hearing in his left ear, and he developed seizures over time, but his intelligence remained completely intact. 18 months after the incident, Anatoly would return to work. He would go on to complete his PhD, and he would end up holding the post of coordinator of physics experiments at the U-70 proton synchrotron, which is where the incident had originally occurred. Even after everything that has transpired, Anatoly would go on to lead a long life, and according to my research, he turned 81 years old this past June. Now, for this particular story, there have been different reports given over the years. So as far as how much of this story is 100% factual, it's hard to completely know, but I'll do my best to tell this tale of survival and determination. Ricky McGee was born in either 1970 or 1971 in Gippsland, Victoria, Australia. Gippsland is a rural region that makes up the southeastern part of Victoria. He would move around a handful of times throughout his life, working a large variety of jobs over the years. That brings us to 2006. Ricky was living in Queensland, but had been recently offered a job in Port Hedland, Western Australia. After he decided to take the job, he set off on the very long drive in his 2001 Mitsubishi Challenger. Now this is the part where details become a bit unclear. Ricky himself first reported that his car had broken down on this trip, but later on when the Washington Post reached out to him about his story, it changed drastically. He would later tell a tale where he was drugged by some hitchhikers that he had stopped to help and was left for dead in a shallow grave. No matter what the truth is, Ricky was left in a rough situation. He would travel for 10 days across the northeastern fringe of the Tanami Desert, losing consciousness sporadically due to heat exhaustion. He ate leeches, insects, ants, lizards, snakes, and anything else that was edible that he could get his hands on. He would consistently scavenge for water in various dams and water holes, stating that he often only ate one meal a day, and it was just enough food and water to keep himself alive. For about 10 weeks, Ricky lived within a hole. During the daytime, he would consistently be cooking, and in the evening, he would basically freeze. Because the outback can be one of the most unforgiving terrains on all of planet Earth. After 71 days of barely surviving, Ricky would end up being rescued by nearby station hands, who just happened to be surveying the area. By the time he was found, he had dropped from 230 pounds down to a measly 99 pounds. His survival was a pure miracle. Over the years, his story and tale of survival have been questioned by many, but Ricky has stayed true to what he went through and even wrote a book titled Left for Dead: How I Survived 71 Days in the Outback. Whether one completely believes his tale of survival or not, a person's ability to survive typically boils down to three things: water, food, and shelter, along with a mindset of doing whatever it will take to survive another day. For survival depends on what you do, not what you think, and there's never any harm in hoping for the best as long as you've prepared yourself for the absolute worst. Thank you all for tuning in to another episode. If you enjoy the content, please hit the like and subscribe button. It helps the channel continue to grow. Also, you can check the description box below and find the link to my merch store. Tons of awesome designs, and the proceeds help fund the channel. I also just started a new membership tier for the channel. It's $2.99 a month and comes with some pretty cool perks, so if that interests any of you, then please go check it out. Also, if you'd like to submit a real-life scary story that you would like featured on an episode on the channel, please do so using the email linked in the description box below. As always, I do all the research, writing, recording, and editing for the channel myself, so anything you do to support the channel is greatly appreciated. Until next time, I will see you all again as we head back into the cellar.